thinking that we should move this to another part of the report?
No, I just noticed in the executive summary, under the key findings and recommendations, once they're solidified, then we need to continue listing them. But again, I agree with you that we just need to determine the order that you want those recommendations. And then there is a question regarding the aspirational goals. I think Bridget had made a suggestion as to whether or not a full explanation of those was needed, or if it would be sufficient to use the language that's included in the executive summary, based on the fact that they're aspirational.
What did you have in mind with regard to a full explanation, Bridget?
I think once we get into some of the suggestions, wishes, and aspirational goals, some of those are lengthy, and how do we just compress them down to more simpler recommendations? And so, for example, to go into our first listing of aspirational, it feels redundant to me. We have aspirational goals for county leaders and stakeholders, and then we have a back page of aspirational wishes and aspirational goals that I think are specific to topics that came up that necessarily, I think we can capture those in the first two. Ensure justice-involved youth have access to qualified counsel that provides age-appropriate advocacy. Attorneys appointed to represent youth should be committed to understanding root causes of delinquency, will advocate for proven and promising interventions tailored to meet their clients' needs and reduce delinquency behaviors, is sort of gets to the heart of the recommendations, I think, at the tail end of the report, where you're far more detail-oriented. I was just moving for brevity.
And I was thinking that they should match. So I think in the executive summary, it should have like a list, and then the further details would be found below. So the title of each recommendation would be in the upwards part, and then the full detail would be below.
That works for me.
Okay.
How does that work for you, Bridget?
Sure.
So I think we just need to decide which ones which ones are the final. So there's a list in the executive summary as far as aspirational goals for county leaders and stakeholders. It would be my recommendation that when we get to that section, we decide which ones are going to stick, and maybe look at the two areas and then make sure they match, and we can make that the list, and then the details will be in the section. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Okay.
it does. So let's just stick a pin in this with regard to the aspirational goals, and we'll flesh it out as we get further into the report. Okay, so under key findings and recommendations, because we'd started that and then we jumped to it. So as far as I'm concerned, especially if we're going to move the aspirational goals for county leaders and stakeholders further down into the report, this whole section with regard to key findings and recommendations in the first instance under methodology, we ought to just chump, and just go straight to the section as it appears on the next page where it says key findings and recommendations. Okay? Because for me that was kind of confusing anyhow. Okay.
So I just reordered these in the way that I think goes from the earliest point of contact and prevention and early intervention. We had this sort of backwards. I felt like we were starting with deep end interventions at some point in time. I just spent a little time kind of making sure that we're doing upstream recommendations first and foremost. That's the most cost saving. It's the most effective, is keeping youth that don't need to be in the youth justice system away from the youth justice system altogether. And just to kind of talk through this really quickly, then I went into, like, once a kid is involved in the youth justice system, what were our group's recommendations? Moved that up a little bit. And then if those kids are involved in multiple systems, that collaboration, planning, and engagement continuum of care section was moved up. And then the workforce planning, which we can get into, addressing racial equity, disparities, and inclusion, we can maybe rename that a little bit, but fostering community safety and public health to gun violence, those ones I pushed a little bit further down because those were even further in. But, you know, much of these recommendations under these key categories, we were a little bit redundant, and I just tried to go through last night to kind of just move out some things where we said the exact same thing in different categories and just moved them up in the correct categories, so that it flows from earliest point in prevention to deep end involvement, what some of the recommendations from this committee would look like. If that makes sense to everybody, I would just recommend we go in that direction for key findings.
Yeah, well, from my perspective, as it relates to the order of things, it makes sense to go from the most, the earliest interventions, the things that can be done either by way of prevention or early intervention first, and work all the way up to, as you said, called it deep end, which are going to be the things that are most costly and least productive. So that makes sense. I'm curious as to, have you presented those things in that order to Laura so that she could put it in, or are we in the
It's-
process of trying to?
It's in that way. I adjusted them, so it's in that order right now.
Okay,
So what's in front of you is the order that was revised to go in that direction.
okay.
So first key finding is about prevention, early intervention, community-based alternatives. I think most of our stakeholders, our presentations and experts that came to the table to present to us really highlighted the importance of directing supports and funding to community-based alternatives, investing in programming to enhance supports through diversion, healing-centered approaches across the continuum, such as restorative justice, funding. I would recommend, you know, really that pro-social, vocational activities, things to keep kids that we have funded right now that are receiving some cuts, that we help prioritize those, keeping kids out of the system when they have pro-social activities. We did address continuing to fund things like in-home therapies, wraparound supports to reduce violence. So those were our just categories under prevention, early intervention, community-based alternatives. Any objection from those? Okay.
Yeah. Now, some of these things that we're talking about would require that the county supplant monies that you're going to lose.
I think it's providing supplemental funding to things that maybe should have always been funded by the county and not 100% relying on the state's reclaim dollars. I think a county that cares about young people is going to invest in more pro-social activities, diversion, and supports for their families. I think we've been heavily reliant on the state's reclaim funding. So I would say, you know, that would be, and we can articulate this in a way that, you know, there are numerous funding streams through reclaim. It's not just variable that has pretty significant ups and downs, but when we shouldn't be 100% reliant on that. Our community, our county should be investing in young people as diversion upstream. So yes, I think it's support, but it should always be there to me, regardless of what the reclaim funding is.
To me, that's a recommendation almost in itself.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because what you're saying in essence is that the county needs to take a position that requires it to provide funding that it has not previously provided, and not just be reliant upon
Correct.
state funding. I'm not exactly sure of the language.
I think that could likely go into the first recommendation, and we can just flesh it out a little
Yep.
bit.
Happy to do that.
Okay.
Works for me. Now, with regard to under action items, you have highlighted the first bullet point. Is that the only one where we're going to put a dollar amount?
No, I highlighted that because I was just going through this like today. But that is the one that we have a dollar amount for. The others, I think, we would ask for a specific dollar amount there, just to supplement some of those intervention and diversion programs. We will get that provided before the end of the week when the report is due.
I am concerned about being pragmatic as to what we really think the county is likely to do. You know, I think that they want to help. Question is, how many dollars they have available to make these things happen, and do we need to make some kind of a statement as it relates to order, priority, with regard to the things that we put into each one of these sections? I'm sorry, Jennifer, I know that you tried to get in a little bit earlier.
No, I was just going to say, whether it's in the executive summary or somewhere, I think we should make a note that we're looking at least restrictive environment so that we can catch the largest number of kids at the front end to most restrictive at the back end. There might be fewer kids, but those are, as Bridget said, the deeper end kids. So looking at it sort of like we look at our prevention pyramid, right? The most kids are going to get served on the front end, and it's going to cost us less versus the higher end kids at the deep end that we really need to take a different approach to. But I think we should call out that that's why we've done that order, or somewhere saying, you know, we've gone from prevention, knowing that that's like light touch, to high end, deep end, you know, just to help explain our order. And not that one recommendation is more important than another, but that's why we've laid it out that way.
Yeah, I think an explanation along those lines is useful. Does it work, Laura?
Yes, I think that could likely go into the executive summary somehow, as far as the methodology. I mean, it sort of fits into how you framed out the recommendations.
Okay.
Okay.
Marvin? How are you today? Good.
Got one quick question. I hear what you're saying about if the county might have, do we still make a dollar amount recommendation even though they might not do it? I'm like,
Yes.
okay, yeah, because
And then you kind of have to work with what you get, right? So it's the scaled back version of it costs this much, we have this much, we can only do it, you know, this to this
Okay.
size.
Yeah, you know, I mean, anything that we come up with is going to be a guesstimate anyhow as to, you know, what it's going to take. But I think if we put a dollar amount with these kind of things, and again, if we're saying, and I don't know if you are saying this or not, Bridget, but if we are saying that this is sort of like rank order, you know, this would be first priority. If you got money left over, you can do this. Or if you want to give some money to that and then something to the next and something to the next, if you want to spread it across the whole thing, you know, that's fine. But I think that we should try to put wherever possible for those things that we're requesting funding for some kind of a dollar amount.
I did, yeah. So where I had dollar amounts, they're provided in this revised report today. So some of the other ones are, which we'll get to, we'll have to put some
A little harder to come by.
speculative, yeah.
Okay, okay. Well, let's do what we can, because I think I'm trying to put myself in the position of a county council person looking at this report and trying to make a determination as to, you know, what do I think is the best use of taxpayer funds to accomplish the goals that we've set forth. So, I mean, anything that allows them to make an intelligent decision based upon the information that we're providing to them, not just about the cost, but also about the benefit, I think is something we want to include in the report. Okay. So, so is there anything else under the funding for prevention and early intervention and community-based alternatives? Okay. And then, Laura, before we even get before we even start with the key findings and recommendations, we're gonna put the statement about why we're doing it this way, right? So we're gonna say light touch all the way to heavy hand, something along that line.
I added that to methodology just now regarding the importance of the continuum, and sort of frame that out a little bit. I'll let you take a look at it and see if it needs to be duplicated somewhere, or moved somewhere.
This is one place where I don't think that redundancy is a bad thing.
Okay,
You know, I think we can say it there, but I think we say it again here as it relates to key findings and recommendations. You know, this is why we're doing
Yep.
this, and this is the order in which we're going at it.
okay, got
Okay.
it.
Okay. Under probation and staffing to provide post-detention supports. Any issues as it relates to that?
I struggled with the title of this, but that's okay. Because it makes it sound like every kid on probation spends time in detention, and that's not the reality. Very few number of kids on probation are in detention at some point in time. But I think, aside from that, we can tweak that title a little bit for the recommendation. So probation, to me, you know, this is something that I think our probation officers, our diversion specialists, and our specialized dockets folks came in and articulated the complexity of carrying a caseload of kids with significant trauma. They've witnessed violence in the community. They are dealing with, many of our expert testimonial talked about how many kids are coming to the juvenile justice system by way of abuse and neglect. And so these are cases that aren't the same as adult probation. You're carrying a young person, but you're working with all the systems around that young person's, those young people. So this is where I think our recommendations for additional probation officers to align with Annie Casey Foundation's probation transformation. I don't know that that's the ideal. I don't know that we're going to be able to get to the 12 to 15, but if we can get our probation officers to carry something closer to 20 youth, that would make life much more manageable for those probation officers who, right, and it'll help young people that need more of a case management coach, mentor style versus the old style of just check-in, surveillance, punishment. We're really looking at growing opportunities for young people while out there on probation, meeting individual case plan goals, probation officers looking more like a support and case management to these young people, coaching them to get to their goals. So that is a big ask, which is to hire 15 additional probation officers to reduce those caseload sizes, to provide that support. I think you all put some great recommendations regarding types of training that we should do around positive youth development, adolescent development, trauma-informed care. You know, we talked about, and young people, I think, spoke on their own behalf. I think we saw that through the Youth Justice Collective interviews where they talked a lot about job training and employment opportunities. When we have lower caseload sizes, that allows our probation officers to spend that time with young people and help them obtain those goals. And then this is where we sort of tucked in but I think it's an important part of developing partnerships with local business owners, trade unions, employment specialists, to work with young people that are justice involved. I think this is really about more of a bringing folks together and figure out how to help young people meet their goals for jobs. They want to earn money the right way. They want to be productive members of our community. And if we want them to stop juvenile delinquency issues that are led by poverty, abuse, and neglect, we've got to provide opportunity. And so I think all the recommendations baked into that section align really well with improving, you know, probation staffing and best practices in probation.
How about if when we nominate this section as probation and staffing to provide post-intervention supports?
How about just case management supports? Because then it's not post-intervention even. It could be even prior to.
Or probation and staffing support, I mean, you could use that too, just take out detention.
That work for you, Bridget?
Sure.
Okay, let's do that. Anything?
In the part about the development partnerships, would it be appropriate to add, community organizations? And the reason I say that, like our church, we had for the summer a youth paint program that taught them how to paint. And they actually gave them a job, or gonna give them a job during the summer after they learn how to paint. So if you got other organizations like that, we could partnership with them.
Laura? We can plug that in?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
I think it's important, to call out just removing the barriers for families and systems. So I know we have a transportation recommendation in here. We're looking at more probation officers and home-based workers to go meet families where they are. I think that's a really important piece to note, because we do know for so many of our parents and families, they're so overwhelmed, and that's why the kids kind of get stuck in the system. They're missing appointments. So I think it's important to note that we recognize that that's been a real barrier in this community, and we're trying to help make recommendations that remove that barrier.
Yeah. And maybe we should just emphasize, workforce development isn't just for the young people, but it could also benefit caregivers, so, okay. Anything else on that one?
Nope. Guys? Okay. So we're under collaboration, planning, and engagement for continuum of care.
Yeah, so I think the other theme that we heard a lot was that young people don't just, are generally that come into contact with the youth justice system are coming from other youth serving systems, education, child welfare, mental health services, Board of Developmental Disabilities. These are oftentimes multi-system involved young people. So I think the importance of where Cuyahoga County, as a whole, can support diversion from the youth justice system by bringing together these other entities in child serving systems like FCFC, which is Family Children First Council, Division of Children and Family Services, the Adams Board, the Board of Developmental Disabilities, and Educational Services, to participate in the Care First Cuyahoga work that we'll be doing. I do not have a dollar amount for this one, but I think we broke down in the action steps many of the things that Care First Cuyahoga will be embarking on. The request at the bottom here is to fund the continuum of care, which will, the dollar amount for that will be identified after the planning and design phase of that, which is, about a year out. But I still would like the county leaders to support this effort. This is going to require better service coordination, which will help kids get out of probation, off of probation, or avoid court involvement altogether. So this actually probably could move before probation if we're going on the logic that we talked about earlier. But I think it's important to highlight that the issue around juvenile delinquency cannot be addressed by the court alone, that this has to be a collaborative, multi-system effort to divert kids away from the youth justice system or divert them away from the child welfare system.
My preference would actually be to move it up.
All right, we'll move
Okay,
that up.
And move the probation back because, again, using the logic that we started out with.
I'm sorry to jump on that, but I think probation, that need is really high. I mean, I understand why, but I wouldn't shift them. I think the probation need, and it's an actual dollar amount.
Yeah.
It's identifiable. There are standards you brought up in there. I wouldn't change. I mean, they're both important, but I wouldn't change the order.
Okay.
then we need to talk about this a little bit. I agree with you. You know, as a matter of fact, I mean, my first order of business really has been from the beginning that we needed to give the juvenile court, you know, the funds that it needed in order to put more people on the ground, having hands-on contact with these kids as frequently as possible. And so I agree with that. This piece with regard to continuing our collaboration, planning, and engagement for continuum of care, I think is so important as it relates to getting the community engaged, that I think we really have to put a priority on that. But we probably need to highlight with regard to that aspect of things that deals with increased numbers of probation officers, that this is really a priority in what needs to be done, regardless of where we put it in the order. I'm just saying, I think that getting the community engaged in this has got to be a top priority, okay? But getting them the money to, well, first of all, the money for that is not going to be coming until later. The money for this has got to be immediate as far as probation officers are concerned. And maybe in drafting this, we can talk about the fact that, you know, when that comes to pass with regard to the community engagement, that it would be in the county's best interest to be supportive of, you know, making that happen. But as far as immediacy is concerned, getting more probation officers is immediate.
But if we explain we're going from least restrictive to most restrictive, and not the first thing is our most important recommendation, it's the least restrictive recommendation, right? It's not what's first is number one, what's second is number two. I think if we can explain that, it will show it's more on the continuum and not because it's third on the list, it's not the third most important. Does that make sense? Like,
I'm not sure which one you're referring to.
like if we, in terms of our order of our findings and recommendations, if we're looking at least restrictive, right, having some versus most restrictive, it's not that recommendation that's first is number one, and that's the one we all voted is the top priority to fund, and the second one is the top. It's like, it's the least restrictive approach, but it's not priority number one. Does that make sense?
I guess I'm
Yeah.
thinking more about what are we asking county council to do and what's our recommendation? Throughout all our meetings, it's all come down to dollars. And so funding. And the programs we were shown from the court are unbelievable as far as what the probation department does and the various, many more programs than we had at the adult court. I guess that's why my focus is more, I understand what you're talking about. I don't think any of these things, you know, in terms of weighing what should be, they probably could all be across the board even. But I'm just thinking, we're supposed to be telling what do we want county council to do? Like, nice to be aspirational, but how about writing a check and providing the things the court needs?
I think there's logic on both models. And if we wanted to, we could just put the flow as going from prevention to most deep-end intervention. And then at the bottom, we could put, these are our asked as priority or something like that, that have funding dollars. We could do that. Okay.
Yeah. I think that does it. Like I said, we can highlight that this is a priority for funding. Okay? Okay. What do you say? No,
It's not eliminating anything, it's just keeping
yeah, not only is it not eliminating anything, but
for the flow.
yeah, and I think if we are intentional about highlighting where we think the dollars would be most productive, especially in the short term, you know, that's consistent with what we were called upon to do. Agree?
Yep.
I'm good.
Okay. Okay. Going to workforce planning for behavioral health and trauma services. Anything there? Okay. addressing racial equity and disparities and inclusion. Any additional effort needs to be put into that section? Okay. Moving to fostering community safety and a public health approach to gun violence.
I don't have anything additional on that. I think it's in the right spot for it.
Okay. Isn't,
I have a quick question regarding that
Sure.
area. I think we currently have 2 sections, unless it shows up differently on mine. But we have finding, data points considered, recommendation, action items, finding, recommendation, action items. Can we,
Right.
can we combine those?
Yep.
yes.
Okay, cool.
Yes. That was probably the function of moving things around.
Should we make reference in this section to the recently initiated?
Yeah, I think this is going to definitely overlap much of what I assume the new committee is going to be taking on. I think these are just opportunities to elevate it from our recommendations. So strengthening, social and economic protective factors, housing, educational, job opportunities. I think we heard this sort of over and over again for lots of folks, that if, we did deal with, and some of the data on here, I do want to do a quick double check also before we finalize our report on that. But, at this point in time, we're in a good place to begin planning some of these efforts as we're starting to see a reduction in youth violence in our own communities. I think this is an important time to continue to work on things that are protective factors for those communities most impacted by gun violence. I assume that this is going to be a large task for the new committee that the county has developed. Is it a committee?
It's an office.
An office. So I think this will be kind of a nice segue into that work.
So it's technically called, what, the Office on Violence Prevention?
Correct.
Okay. Yeah, so I think that under the section that talks about coordinate countywide efforts to address gun violence with public health strategies, we ought to somehow or another reference the Office on Violence Prevention. Maybe in conjunction with or as part of the efforts of the Office on Violence Prevention.
Yep.
Okay.
Good.
Okay. Anything else under that section? If not, moving to facility and infrastructure reform.
I didn't really have, I think we had initial conversations along the notes about this. I did add one thing, because this is talking about a little bit more, some things that I think are just, beyond Cuyahoga counties. We're waiting to hear back from Ohio Department of Youth Services about their decision on awarding this county funding for a community correctional facility, which will be hugely impactful for our county. If we have a safe alternative from DYS that is secure, trauma-informed, and incorporates the strengths of our own community versus driving our young people down to counties far away from home where their families and community members cannot access them. If the state were to award us, that would be, I think, profoundly impactful for our county. I know we've talked about it a lot in here. The only thing is we don't have a lot of control over the decisions that the state makes on that, but I think we should continue to support those efforts. I think we should continue to aspire to be awarded that, and if not, we'll take up, next step interventions for advocacy for that, but we desperately need this more than any other county in the state of Ohio. And it will have a positive impact on our reclaim funding also, which will allow us to continue to fund the other things discussed in this report, things like credible messengers. Right now, we have a tiny pilot started on that is not enough for us to go, out as far as we need to. We have a little bit of funding for restorative justice, but it's certainly not enough to go countywide. If we were awarded this community correctional facility, I think it would be able to help us to continue to sustain programming in a more consistent way for the county that needs it the most, and is grappling with the highest level of gun violence than any other community in the state of Ohio. So I think some of this is, the other thing I added here was just, the court's budget for residential beds, which often are diversions. Our judges and magistrates have to make decisions. So when young people don't have a safe space to return home to, or their families are no longer involved, or they're multi-system youth that have a serious delinquency matter, but they also are involved with child welfare, we have to place those young children out of the home. Where are we putting those young people? So an ask that I added in would be support for residential beds, so that young people do not end up at, state facilities. If we have the opportunity to intervene in a therapeutic residential facility, is a better bet than putting them in a state institution like ODYS. So I just added that to our ask. I don't really have anything else to say on that, unless anyone has questions, concerns.
I have lots of concerns. I don't know if I got any questions. I think that this whole thing with regard to trying to place kids that really are neither fish nor fowl, kind of falling into that gap. For me, it's the difference between really being to remediate behavior and having behavior go south with a quickness, So trying to find some money to find places for them. And of course, early on we were talking about sort of the court's ability to place kids in some kind of housing, and there was some question about, how that was going for you. And I don't know at this point what your feeling is as it relates to, how much of that you have available to you currently, and what happens if this money doesn't come through.
One thought is that we could add a few additional data points regarding the outcomes associated to not placing youth close to home. That could strengthen the point. So whether it is residential beds or just a local facility.
Residential beds, I just think it's huge.
And to Jen's point earlier, these should be reserved for when we have no other options and a youth has to be placed out of the home. But yeah.
Well, until Ohio Rise, families couldn't access residential treatment for kids unless they relinquished custody of their kids, which is crazy, right? So having stabilization beds, having placements and programs that specifically address trauma is really important for our kids to succeed and to give the parents or guardians access to a resource that they didn't have otherwise.
Thank you.
And of course, having at some kind of a facility where they're kind of close to home, has to be a priority in the way that we get this done too.
I mean, and then the other recommendation here is just providing, improving facility conditions. So that doesn't, that's our local detention center and operations according to, and I think here's where we just cited back to the Ohio Juvenile Justice Working Group recommendations. I think it's important when we are talking about housing young people, whether it's in a respite home, a residential bed, our detention center, a community correctional facility, that, that there is a culture of rehabilitation, a trauma-informed staff, sufficient funding for programming. I do oversee detention services, and I can tell you it's another place where, while we're almost 100% reliant on community volunteers to give their free time, which is absolutely wonderful, but some of these people hold full-time jobs, and keeping, 130 kids busy and engaged is a large effort. And especially when we talk about, taking them outside, it's easier said than done at times, but, county's been supportive to us on physical supports to make that easier, to get more youth outside at a time. But some of these things are vital to well-being of young people. Play, joy outside, even though these are kids that, are in a juvenile detention setting or a correctional facility or a residential facility, it's important for them to be out because those are developmental norms they have to meet. And it helps them to return to the community better adjusted.
And I think, vocational training, life skills, credit recovery, all those things are really important, which are happening in all those environments. But I think the other thing, to Judge Adrian's point about local residential, is that push for, whether they're coming from a group home or a residential facility, to work with the family while they're here and help support the youth returning home. Because we really want to make sure we're following kids when they're stepping out of the most restrictive to a less restrictive environment, so they don't end up back in the system, back in the court, back in detention. And so you want to have that warm handoff, or that sort of continual follow through, where it's not like, here's a piece of paper, now go call a phone number and try to find, support somewhere and get put on a wait list. Like, we want to make sure that that isn't happening. We're removing as many barriers as we can for families to keep kids connected to treatment, to make sure there's support, because for some of our kids, it is safe to be, housed somewhere else, and going back home into the community and the environment that was so chaotic, you need someone to help follow them so they don't get in their own way, right? So.
Okay. Okay, anything else for facilities and infrastructure? Moving then to system accountability and data. Anything need to be added in that section?
I don't think so. This is really about, as leaders of our community, how do we put data out there that is in its right and true perspective? So I think we have a problem in our community with portraying youth violence, which is far outside, if you looked at it, you would think it far outsizes, adult violence, and it's just not the reality. So I think it's important to work with the reality, real data that is true to young people, so that we're not painting a picture of young people more violent than in fact they actually are. So I think this is important for us, and I don't believe that it should be the responsibility of just juvenile court to put out data while we can try. I think it's important to, as a community, we talk about young people in a way that reflects the real concerns that we have. It's never okay for a young person to be engaged in violence, but the way that it's been portrayed over the last few years is that they're the only ones engaged in violence, and that's just not true. So,
Are you comfortable with the information system that you have currently?
so the court is moving to a new, are you talking about our court case management system?
Yes.
We're we are embarking and have selected a vendor and in the process of providing that to county for budgets, and the presentation is upcoming.
Haven't gone through that process. I just really feel like most computer companies are snake oil salesmen. So be careful. But you've given them the money, your estimate as to what it's going to cost you to do that? Not yet. So, okay. But you're going to need support for that too. Right. Laura?
As a quick note, I believe that was on the agenda at yesterday's council meeting, the introduction of the item. And I believe it's upwards to a cost of $7 million.
Chump change. Okay. Well, good luck with that. Okay. Support for guardian ad litem and CASA programs. Anything we need to add with regard to that? I'm concerned only from the standpoint that given all of the other cost factors, I hope that this doesn't get lost in the shuffle. Because from the presentations that were made to us as it related to what CASA brings to the process and what it does for both families and children, I think that we've made a finding that they play an important part. I don't know if there's some way for us to highlight, that their continued funding at a level that was consistent with the way they were before, I guess, COVID would be really useful to the court. And, yeah.
So as I brought up last meeting, I know I seen where, I guess it started from the federal, come to the state, they actually cut the fundings for CASA. So hopefully they are reinstated, but they did cut it. So that makes it very difficult,
Yeah, I think that the only thing that we can do at this point is to say that we think it's important that they have a continued role and that they be funded to the degree that the county can find the funds to make that happen at a level that's going to be effective for both the kids and the families that they come from. I think, if we can just make sure that as we're making this recommendation, that we indicate that we strongly encourage them, the county that is, to assist CASA's continued involvement with the court system. Okay, moving on to suggestions, wishes, and aspirational goals. Okay, Bridget, here we are. Okay. So we got to go back to what we had before, kind of compare and contrast. Anything with regard to the findings?
Yeah, I think for my takeaway, it was just trying to get brevity here. Like, what are we going to be recommending? And just putting it in one place versus two places. And making sure that we're staying within the scope of things that county council can actually have an impact or what is within the confines of the law, how do we do those things, so, as we're, like, potential action items, public transparency, I did capture that, as the top few bullet points. I think we need to just compress some of this stuff.
Okay. Well, I'm fine with that. I'm
And
just-
I'll just add on, again, we may want to look at, I think it's page 9, I'm looking on the electronic version of the executive summary, and then just decide, we have 6 listed
Right.
aspirational goals, so which ones of those, do we need to expand them, do we need to condense, do we need to make them match?
Maybe just that list is sufficient. Because we can't do these things,
Right.
and the county council can't do them. So the list may in and of itself be sufficient.
That was kind of what I thought too, because when Richard was talking about expanding, I just said, we can't do none of it. They can't do this stuff anyhow. This is just things that we want them to think about and for them to try to make some sort of an effort to have an impact on in some respects, just by den of the fact that they have a bully pulpit from which to speak. Okay. So, so the question, I guess, is if we take the things that appear on page 9, that 6-item piece, does that mean that we collapse the things that appear later in the report? Is that your suggestion?
That would be my suggestion.
The only thing I do think you lose with that suggestion is that the bind-over practices, I don't know that are addressed in the list of 1 to 6, but I could be wrong.
No, I really do think that it's important for us to say something about the bind-over practices, but only from the standpoint of trying to see if the county can take the point on trying to pull the people who have the ability to actually do that together to talk about how can they make that process better. And the county prosecutor may not want to do it. The court may feel that its hands are tied. But it's one of the kind of things where I think there needs to be some kind of shuttle diplomacy back and forth between the different entities, because there's clearly a problem. Okay. And it may be a problem that's unique to Cuyahoga County because of the amount of gun violence that we have. But just as you were saying earlier, Bridget, we are still talking about young people who've engaged in some pretty terrible behavior, but who are not unsalvageable.
Could we just include this suggestion here that under the bind-over practices in the executive summary? In the aspirational goals section? The county council president, like that, or reword that suggestion?
Yeah, I think as long as we're not doing anything that disrupts due process or undermines, the law,
Sure.
and it's a review of what are common themes we're seeing for young people that are bound over. I think that would be important data for a group of folks to continue to evaluate and look at. But there were some places where I felt like we were beginning to kind of jump into undermining a judge's sole responsibility for due process. So as long as we're staying with, all right, we're going to zoom out and look at what are factors that kids that are bound over have common themes, unmet needs, access issues, resource issues, and we want to have a group continue to convene and look at those sort of as a whole. I think that stays within the confines of the law and doesn't disrupt a judge's sole responsibility. That's my concern, is just, I don't want to put anything in here that would interfere in due process, that would undermine a judge's sole responsibility, or that it can't be supported legally, if that makes sense.
Jennifer, you want to read that section just so it's clear? Okay.
And we might need to read it, but there's only.
It's, I believe, and again, I'm on the electronic version and I've made some changes. It's, it was on 22. And do you want me to read it?
Yes, please.
Okay. It currently reads, and Judge Adrian, I'll just mention, I think the way it's framed out, just for discussion purposes, I think back to when you had the domestic violence task force. It could be something along those lines, where it's stakeholders that come together to analyze like trends and policy. So it says, county council president could convene a stakeholder group to include the county executive, the juvenile division, the county prosecutor, the county public defender, and a representation from the private defense bar to discuss creation of a predicate panel to review bind-over decisions in order to identify trends and address systemic issues.
Could we
Right.
consolidate that or reframe that? Because if you're looking at the trends and seeing what's happening, I think that's a point we could include.
I mean,
Under the, aspirational section.
I
not
kind of
under
wrote
the-
that one, so I like it like it is.
You like it?
Yeah. So I mean, tell me how you would change it, and that's fine. But that is the sense of what, I was thinking. We really are asking them to pull people together. You say, hey, you gotta look at this because there's a problem. So, Bridget, where does it cross the line for you?
So I probably, I'm not as comfortable, and of course, remember, I work for the court, so the judges, I'm less comfortable with the verbiage that looks like we're questioning all of their decisions. I'm more comfortable with looking at trends and systemic issues.
I'm not interested in individual decisions.
To review bind-over decisions.
That's
The
what-
sentence
how
that says
about we
to
cha-
review bind-over decisions is,
It's
for
actually,
me,
I'm looking at bind over at the bind
okay,
over
so maybe
process.
decisions isn't the right word.
Yeah.
Maybe we can,
How about to review bind-over trends and address systemic issues? Just remove those words.
Yeah, I think we're really out of bounds. I know I keep beating the drum on this, but it's nothing that we as a committee can control at all. I know there's people out there wanting to get an answer to this, as if we gotta look at the law and the nature of the crimes. It's really outside of the bounds of what we're here for. I just, and like you said, and what Bridget's saying is almost you're saying, we're gonna look over your shoulder, judges, and we're gonna second guess what you're doing. And maybe they're not making, I'm not saying they're making a correct decision all the time. Some, their hands are tied, they're mandatory. They have nothing, much as they might not want to send anybody to adult court, they have no choice. I know there's a sentiment that the county prosecutor's overdoing it. I don't know enough about those cases to answer that one way or the other. But I think we've talked about it. There's no question we've recognized that there are people in the community that are concerned about it. We all have a reason to be concerned about it, but we're way out of bounds for what the committee has control over or what we can do.
But what I was listening to is we were not saying, I get what Bridget's concerned about, we're saying about their decision, just the process. Is it bad for us to speak about the process?
It's not
I-
bad for
I'm-
anybody to speak about the process. The problem is the process is set by the legislature. And we're here to talk about what can we do, the county council do? What can we recommend to them that they can do to help out this program in the juvenile court system?
But I think that's the whole point, is what can they do? They may not be able to do much, but it can't hurt to suggest that they talk about it. And that they talk about it not in a vacuum, but that they talk about it, in conjunction with the other people who are really dealing with it on a day-to-day basis. They might come away and say, we've reviewed it, we've actually examined it, and we've come to the conclusion that there's nothing that we can do to tweak the system at a local level that would be effective. Or they may come up with some kind of a suggestion that allows for them to have some sort of a review process of the process writ large at the local level, because it's implemented in every community differently. So let's take a look at the way it's implemented in Cuyahoga County. This is aspirational, just like everything else that we're talking about that's aspirational. I don't see where we're so far out of line just by asking them to take a look at it. That's my position.
We could add to the language that this panel would review bind-over legislation, processes, trends, and to address systemic issues. So again, it takes out the individual review and makes it more of a policy review.
I guess where I was going is not so much even on the individual decisions, but we have a lot of youth from this community that are committing gun crimes that are then being bound over, which is now impacting reclaim funding because you have more kids going to ODYS. And so looking at Cuyahoga's data relative to like gun charges or violent crimes and how it's impacting our ability to do more diversion programming, it's not the same as it is in Franklin. It's not the same as it is in Hamilton. We keep saying that, but is there a way to reframe this to be, how do you see that one of the biggest things that's happening in this community is because of the level of, number of kids going to ODYS, now it's impacting our funding for prevention, diversion, and our other programs. I don't know. I'm just trying to, we're not, just a way to state, we're not the same as some of the other counties just with what's happening.
I like Laura's idea that just anything that's not going to do what Bridget has a concern about.
Yeah.
For us as a committee of, like, we're trying to undermine or say anybody's doing anything wrong, just highlighting that there is an issue and then step away from it, because that way we're not attacking anybody.
Well, I don't think even under the original language that it could be looked at that we were attacking anybody. I think that it could be viewed, as Bridget was saying, that we were impinging on the prerogatives of any of the folks that were doing it. And I'm saying that I'm not trying to get into the weeds of the individual decisions that are made, but only as the process by which those decisions are put together, so that if there's a better way for the court and the prosecutor and defense, public defender, to work together to try to make sure that when those kinds of cases bubble up, that they are handled in a way that maximizes the number of people who are able to benefit from not being pushed further into the system, then that's fine. If there's no way to do that, that's fine too. But I think it deserves an examination, and all we're asking is that that there be a collaborative examination of the process. That's all I'm saying with regard to this. And that's our motion area, I think.
So, yeah, I think it's just a matter of we need to flesh out the language so that we're not doing things that are not, prudent or within the scope, or, it's, if we're zooming out, we're looking at factors of issues that drove young people into that level of serious offenses, and we're pulling back underlying needs, unmet needs, resource issues, common trends. That, to me, is not the same as questioning individual case judicial decisions. So we'd have to, I think we can work through that as a group, as long as, from my perspective, and again, I think we'll get to a place of having fleshed out language out in a way that, doesn't interfere with individual judicial decisions. That's the scope I'd like for our committee to stay with recommendations. And again, that would be a large task for folks down the road, and could, come to looking at how to support more resources in communities for young people that are at highest risk of that. But that's all I'll say on that section, if that's okay.
And I've played with the language, so if you want to take a look at it, but I think I've addressed the needs.
As Forrest Gump was saying, and that's all I have to say about that. Right? Okay. Okay. So we'll get the language back to everybody. Everybody have an opportunity. We'll keep working at it until we come to consensus.
And Laura, our due date is, again, remind me.
The end of the month.
Okay, so we'll have this done by the end of the month, and then what are our next steps?
So I would recommend, and again, this is up to the subcommittee membership, but that the report would be delivered to the initiator of the group. So likely the Chair of Public Safety and Councilman Gallagher and Council President. And then I would suggest asking for next steps. So I think leave it to those individuals, the council members, to decide how they want you to present it in any other form. I imagine they may invite you to a meeting, but we can go from there. And that'll give you plenty of time for planning.
That sounds like a plan. Under conclusion, is there anything that needs to be reviewed with regard to that, or is everybody okay with that language? Okay. And then the meeting summaries are the meeting summaries. Yep. Okay. I think that you got, I want to publicly thank Bridget for really going above and beyond the call of duty while she was already under the tremendous amount of weight from her day job, to go through these meeting summaries, to try to condense them down to things that were manageable. And so I just want to say thank you.
Thank you. It was a team effort. Appreciate everybody.
Yeah. Okay.
One thing I noticed, we took out the wish list of the court. Do we want to reference that?
So I thought we had it referenced and had a direct link to the copy.
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect.
So if that was okay, I was just trying to cut down on paper.
Okay, all right.
You sure, Bridget?
I don't care. We can keep it in.
Yeah, I kind of like having the wish list in because it's the direct ask from the court, regardless of whatever else we've come up with. The council might want to know, what do you guys?
Yeah, it was just proposed do we just put the link in right here and it pulls up the whole document? But if we want to keep it in the narrative, it's still, we
Do
just
a
reject
combination
the.
of both.
Okay.
I'll do a summary and then.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think I want to do that. Other thing that I wanted, we received an awful lot of information during the time that we've been constituted. And I wanted to get some idea from you guys as to how you thought that information should be referenced in this report.
I have most of it in the appendices, so if anything is not in there, let me know. But the appendice includes all of the information we received, including a live link that'll take them to the full document on the website.
That's everything that every
Everything that was shared.
panelist
Yeah.
shared, bullet, like the PowerPoint presentations that were provided and letters to the committee.
I think I got everything, but we
Okay,
can-
perfect.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I would like to publicly thank you, Laura.
You're very welcome.
Okay. Is there anything else that I'm missing here? Or have we managed to get through this? Not bad, y'all. Yeah,
I know our work is almost done, but myself personally, I like to thank the group that we work with. Everybody, I think we worked pretty good together as best we could with limited time. So I just thank each individual, plus the ladies that have been helping us all along. Even little things like parking, that makes a big difference, you know, so. Notes, and then getting the notes out to us, and so those things make a big difference. And I know you guys are all busy too, so thank you.
yeah, well, as the man says, you know, teamwork makes the dream work, right? Okay. And I want to thank you all too. You know, I mean, it's been a pleasure working with you over this period of time. I know there have been times when I didn't even think we were going to get off the ground because it just seemed as though everybody was so busy and there was so much to consider. I feel that we were in a good place. You know, I feel good about the report, and I'm extremely hopeful that it will provide the guidance that I think it was supposed to provide based upon what we were tasked to do. And if not, Bob, to heck with them if they can't take a joke. Okay. Okay. Is there any other,
Do we need a motion to approve the report with the amendments discussed here today?
yeah, I was going to do that. Is there anything else that needs to be considered with regard to the report before we move to a vote? Okay. Then let me say that I'd like to entertain a motion to approve the final report to be forwarded to County Council with the caveat that there will be some minor amendments which will be adopted after we conclude this meeting.
I'd move that we accept or approve the report with the amendments that were discussed today openly in the meeting, and will be incorporated as part of it.
Is there a second?
Second.
Properly moved and seconded. You've heard the motion. Is there any unreadiness on that motion? Any unreadiness on the motion? Any unreadiness on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Same sign. Motion carries. Thank you very much for all your hard work.